And so tonight you're going to get a little bit of a situation of where this might occur if you're working within an integrated tiered system like comprehensive integrated three-tiered models of prevention, or if you have PBIS in place, or if you have a traditional MTSS. So if you got something with alphabet soup that has 3 tiers or more, you got it. You're going to be working at tier 2 with it. And the best part about this, I will say, is we are going to talk to you about how general education teachers are the persons for whom this was designed. So this has been designed, it has been tested. Mark Buckman, myself, Wendy Oakes, and Eric Common, who's here with us tonight. We have just finished up a series of 3 studies, 2 single case design studies and a randomized control trial. And the evidence is clear that this is effective for helping kids to learn these skills and then to ultimately be more engaged during academic time as they're using those strategies. So if you are new to Ci3T or if you are a seasoned implementer, we just want to give you either way just a quick little reset about what Ci3T is. Many different tiered systems of support are available, and I know across different districts in Kentucky and in Kansas and across coast to coast, more and more people are organizing systems in place to make sure that there's a coordinated system of care that provides supports to all, to some, and to a few. And within Ci3T, it is can be thought of like a broadening of traditional MTSS, and broaden in the sense that it also addresses not just academics and behavior, but also social and emotional well-being. And rather than it being built out consecutively over the years, it's built at one time using a systematic approach, and it has these 3 core components. So as part of Ci3T, it essentially involves creating some clarities like a constitution or a playbook for your school that makes it clear for faculty and staff, administrators, students, and family about what is going to be served in that community in terms of what am I going to teach, how am I going to teach it, what resources am I going to use, what strategies am I going to use to maximize engagement and limit disruption. Also, at the center of Ci3T is positive behavior intervention and support. And David Royer and Wendy Oakes just did a great presentation at the Council for Exceptional Children in Salt Lake City, and they were talking about the tool that is available called the School-Wide Expectation Survey for specific settings. Somebody high-five me because I got that right. Thank you very much. And as part of that tool, you can give that to every adult in your building so that they can weigh in to find out what they think kids need to know to be successful in key areas in your building, like in classrooms and in hallways during arrival and dismissal. And during, if there's a bus involved in getting kids there, that's also there. And the third part of Ci3T, that domain, is social and emotional well-being. And so during the building process, people pick a validated universal resource that is going to be taught to all kids for whether it's preschool through high school. And it's intended to level the playing field, to teach kids things like self-regulation and self-awareness, how to become self-determined lifelong learners. That's the place where you'd focus on things like conflict resolution, bullying prevention, etc. So in a Ci3T system, that is the base. That is the base experience that every single student, general education and special education students, access just by virtue of attending school. And for those of you who have joined us either this year or in past years, you know that on that website, there's a multitude of resources that are available to you to help get Tier 1 in place. And I want to say that even when Tier 1 is in place and you have academic screenings and you have behavior screenings and you've got information on treatment integrity, there's absolutely still going to be some kids that need more than Tier 1 has to offer. And I consistently say, this is not a tragedy. It is an expectation. We would expect some kids to need more than Tier 1 has to offer. And in a Ci3T system that is coordinated away with one list of all the things that are offered, because all of Ci3T, including tiered supports at Tier 2 and Tier 3, is integrated. And back in the days when people used to think Tier 2, I got to start with reading and then I'll move to an academic intervention for math. And then if there's time, I'll work on behavior. In a Ci3T system, we want to meet kids' multiple needs in an integrated fashion. So to that end, when schools are implementing and in districts are implementing every fall and every spring, people provide information on what's happening at Tier 1. Here's the parts that I'm teaching. Here's how I'm using reinforcement. Here's how I'm weaving social skills, etc., into my daily instruction. And so there are clear procedures about how things are going to get taught. That gets assessed. And every fall and every spring, the adults also get to give information on what they think about the goals and the procedures and how well it's working. And that information is used every single year to make amendments, modifications at their specific school based on the data that are coming in from the educators that are implementing it. And in addition to keeping track of what's in place at Tier 1, there's information on student performance, like how are kids faring over time in these systems. So they benchmark student performance academically 3 times a year, fall, winter, and spring. And the same is true with universal behavior screenings. And that is important because we want to make sure that we have a way to detect students that need more than Tier 1 has to offer, and educators also want to have an opportunity to make sure that they get a snapshot in time as to how students are responding to Tier 1 efforts. So tonight, I'm going to give everybody just a moment now to make sure that they have found this spot and they have an opportunity to register to access those modules. I'm going to give you just one quick second to get that done. So tonight we are coming to the end of this series. We have one more after tonight that'll be focused on Tier 3, functional assessment-based intervention. But tonight we're going to focus on a Tier 2 intervention. And specifically, here's how we're going to move through this evening. We're going to talk a little bit about the data that you could review to accurately determine whether or not students might benefit from this support. And in part of doing that, we definitely want to make sure you're looking at what's happening in Tier 1 practices. We want to look at the fidelity data to make sure Tier 1 is in place, because sometimes it will look like, according to your screening data, there's a bunch of kids that might need Tier 2, but in reality, it may be that Tier 1 is not yet in place. So we want to make sure we're setting the stage and the context. Then we're going to hear from Mark Buckman. First we're going to hear from Elise Saracen, and she's going to give us the overview of this intervention that you're going to hear about tonight, Recognize, Relax, Record. And huge shout out to the Institute for Education Sciences. They have funded all this work on the modules for Enhance, and there's a separate project that has specifically funded Project Engage, which has brought to you Recognize, Relax, and Record. And then we're going to hear from Mark Buckman to talk through some first sets of steps about how to move through this intervention. So literally tonight, we're going to walk you from start to finish on how to get this in place. And the back half, we're going to hear from Allison, who's going to get some real details. And I think you're going to be impressed by some of the instructional materials that are there and the resources that are there within that module. And you will have what you need to get this started in classrooms. And then lastly, we're going to hear from Rebecca, who's going to wrap us up so that you make sure that you walk out today knowing what this looks like and how you can move through this step by step. And all of this is in that module for you. So between your access to that module and tonight's presentation, I think you're going to have exactly what you need. If you are part of the team that is actually implementing the new TFI version 3, the 2 domains in your guide for implementation, you might want to jot down these numbers, 2.3 and 2.5. Because tonight, this is perfectly aligned with how you use screening data and how you select from a range of options to use the data that you collect to figure out who might need more. So write down those numbers if you are somebody that is part of a team that is completing the tiered fidelity inventory at your school. So welcome. I hope you feel excited to be here. We're certainly excited to have you. And I think most of you know where to find this because you've registered on that Empower site on that professional learning tab. And if you want to scroll down to that accordion that says a Tier 2 support for students with experiencing anxious feelings, not ancient feelings, but just anxious feelings, then be sure to pop that open if you'd like any of the additional resources. So with that said, I want to talk about where this fits. And before we jump into this conversation, I want you to know we have worked closely for 3 years with teachers from 14 different elementary schools to really test this, to bring it to you tonight with the confidence that we know that when this is done with fidelity, and the teachers have shown us they can do this as part of their general education experiences, this has powerful outcomes for teachers. It was exciting to hear from Tammy tonight when she logged on, and she's now in a district level in a coaching capacity. She unfortunately failed retirement and is working now more than ever. But she was talking about that she wished this had been available when she was a principal, or that she was back as a principal to check it out. But when you're situating this, this is not intended to be a Tier 1 support. So just check that off your list right now. This is a targeted Tier 2 intervention. The second thing I want to say is I have deep admiration for school psychologists, counselors, social workers, and we feel confident. And there's decades of research to show that they can do these types of interventions. This whole project was funded to see, can this be done by general education teachers within the context of the regular school day, where teachers are the ones teaching the small group, where they're the ones helping the kids to apply these skills. And I want you to know it's possible. So listen for the effectiveness, and we've got lots of great comments to share with you about teachers. So as you're thinking about this, many of you I know have been here before and have heard about how Tier 2 works within a Ci3T system. For this particular tier 2 intervention, what I want to say is this is not an intervention that is going to result in a kid going outside of the classroom to get what they need to come back. If you've been in a CrossFit gym, constantly varied functional fitness, high intensity, you've probably heard me talk a little bit about my daughter, who's this extraordinary athlete, and she can jump on that rig and she can do, chest to bars and pull-ups. And my very first time in this gym, it was not a pleasant experience. I just have to be completely honest with you. I should have been far more prepared for the jump rope activity after having had 2 kids and a lot of water. But I made it through the warm-up. And when it was time to go ahead and do the pull-ups, I absolutely could not get it done. And this coach came over and he put 2 rubber bands on that rig. First he put on one, he's like, put your foot inside it and pulled, and nothing happened. So he put on a second rubber band and I put my foot in it and I pulled up, and it was a miracle. My chin was over the bar. So he was such a good coach that he knew what extra things that I needed that nobody else in the class necessarily needed, but that's what I needed to stay and be engaged and access that stimulus of pulling up. What we're talking about tonight, even though many school systems already have things like Tier 1 instruction on social and emotional well-being curriculum, there are still going to be some kids that need more than that base instruction. So today, when we're talking about recognize, relax, record, it is a small group intervention, although not all Tier 2 interventions are in a Ci3T system. This is a small group intervention in which kids are going to learn to recognize what their body feels like when they're anxious. They're going to learn how to relax. They're going to learn 4 strategies, and then they're going to learn how to record their use of their feelings, their use of those strategies, and ultimately their engagement. So as you're thinking about getting started with this Tier 2, we want to make sure you have the language to not only feel comfortable with yourself, but to communicate with other people. And as you're thinking about supporting kids and talking with families about this as a possibility, remember, there are no Tier 2 kids. There are students that might need Tier 2 supports. And these Tier 2 interventions can be provided in a range of contexts and different levels of intensity. We are talking about a Tier 2 intervention that is going to be offered in small group and is designed for use as a classroom teacher of 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade kids. We are working on gathering input from middle school educators to think about what this could look like in that context, but it's been tested with upper elementary. So as you're thinking about it, it's Tier 2, it's additive in nature, so it's not replacing what's done at Tier 1, it is building on top of it. And if you are lucky enough to be in a school that is transparent and saying, here's all the extra things that we do for students, you might have a list of intervention grids, such as this one, like self-monitoring. If you decided after tonight you were going to put recognize, relax, record in place, then you might have an intervention grid for recognize, relax, record. But these intervention grids are important because they name the resource, like the intervention, the strategy, the practice, the program. And remember, that's not a person, it's what the person does. Then there's a description of what the intervention is, and you're going to learn about that tonight. And then the distinction is, rather than it being a crapshoot as to who gets what, you're going to actually look at your data to see which kids might benefit from this. And you can look 3 times a year at fall, winter, and spring. And then every time somebody gets an extra intervention, 3 things we're going to want to know. Is it put in place as planned? Are people comfortable with the goals, the procedures, and the outcome? That's the social validity piece. And importantly, some accurate method of measurement, which is all baked into this intervention for tonight, to see how kids are faring. And then absolutely we collect data to know when it's time to either fade it or intensify it. So in a Ci3T system, you name the intervention, you describe it, and we're going to focus just a minute or 2 on how to make sure that you're finding the right kids that might benefit from that intervention. So if you are somebody working in a school district, that has access to a data platform. These are fictitious kids' names, but let's say I'm a teacher and I want to see how kids in my class are doing. Ideally, you'd be able to pull up your kids in your class and say, show me how my kids are doing in attendance. Show me what they look like in their behavior screening or their academic screening, and help me to figure out which kids might need extra supports. And if you're lucky enough to work in a school that has Ci3T in place, there's already an implementation manual that details every available support for Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So you can look in your manual, look at the data, and then document decisions for next step. So for example, when looking at those screening data to determine who might need more, I can simply say, show me all the kids in my class who may have moderate risk for internalizing, or who have maybe Tier 2 or Tier 3 needs for reading. But as I move through those different interventions, I really want to make sure that I'm not considering one kid. I'm literally looking at the whole group of kids to see who might benefit from this extra support. And absenteeism, attendance, very important for this intervention. And you're going to hear a little bit about this from Mark in a couple moments. But we want to make sure when you are picking kids for this intervention, it is designed for kids that are screening in at moderate risk for internalizing issues. So things like shy, anxious, withdrawn, that type of thing, and who are regular attenders, because we're going to skill build for these kids. And if attendance is an issue, that means it can be challenging to make sure that they are there to get the lessons taught by the teacher. So now, if you are logged in, and if you need help, please continue to put the posts in the chat, and then our team members will strike you back to make sure that we get you logged in. This is the module where we're going to be working tonight. It's called Recognize, Relax, Record. It's this young lady with the long dark hair and holding a pencil in her right hand. So I'm going to give you just a moment to scroll on down to find that particular intervention. And again, it's going to be a Tier 2 intervention, Recognize, Relax, Record. And we're going to have this particular symbol is going to be the symbol that you're going to get used to seeing. This is going to describe the intervention that we're going to walk through tonight. And as people are getting situated and finding that module, if you've already found it, could you go ahead and just pop in the chat what Tier 2 interventions you already have in your setting? And if there's any that you have for internalizing issues, go ahead and pop those in.
All right, so with that, I'm going to give you a really high-level overview of what is Recognize, Relax, Record, which is this Tier 2 intervention. And then we're going to go through the steps individually and have time in breakout rooms to chat and kind of dive deeper. So when we think about who this intervention is designed for, it is designed for students who are experiencing internalizing behavior. And when we think about internalizing behavior, there's kind of some big buckets there. Things like anxiety, depression, social withdrawal, somatization. Those are those like physical symptoms like headaches or stomach aches. And this can manifest lots of different ways for students. It shows up differently. And this intervention is really for students who are experiencing those anxious feelings. And this intervention has three big pieces that we want to teach kids. We want to teach kids how to recognize, what do anxious feelings feel like in my body? So do my hands sweat? Does my heart race? Does my cheeks get flushed? Like, what does it feel like for me when I'm feeling anxious? Then we want to think about what are some strategies I can use to relax. And we're going to explicitly teach students 4 different strategies they can use for when they are experiencing those anxious feelings. And then the last thing is record. We want to teach kids to self-monitor, to recognize when I'm feeling anxious and when I'm able to use those strategies and how that's impacting my level of engagement and how anxious I'm feeling. And the reason why these are kind of the 3 big areas to focus on is because we're really lucky to have just decades of research that support emphasis in these areas. So thinking about that recognize components of helping kids recognize what does this feel like in my body, there's a lot of research that supports that self-awareness of how important that is, and that individuals who have high levels of self-awareness and that self-management, that's associated with some really great long-term outcomes like graduation and employment. When we think about the 4 strategies that were selected, the 4 strategies that are part of this package are breathing, guided imagery, positive self-talk, and progressive muscle relaxation. And we chose those 4 because there's a really strong research base that comes from that like cognitive behavioral intervention literature base. So these are strategies that work to help support anxious feelings, and that's why these are the ones that we want to start teaching kids to use. And then the last piece is that self-management, recognizing how I'm feeling and what strategies I'm using and kind of keeping track of that. And these skills have been tested and noted across like different settings of student populations, grade levels, and can be used for both behavior and academics. So just a lot of really promising research that supports self-management, which is why it's that really important last part of the intervention. And Kathleen kind of mentioned this, but we just want to show you kind of where this came from. So this has been a multi-year project, as you see, it's a module. It actually started, I can't believe we haven't shared this yet. This is like our favorite part to share. It actually started, we were doing a session, we shared the module, and one teacher came up after, talked to Kathleen and said like, hey, I think our whole district needs this. And they went back and they looked at the data, and the next district team meeting, they were like, hey, like, is this something that you guys want to do? Like, the data says that maybe this would be helpful. And that's where this started from, was one teacher who was like, our district needs this. And then the district was like, yeah, we do, let's do it together. So really exciting that it kind of has that like grassroots nature of people saying, hey, we want this, let's do it. So we got to practice this in some single case designs. We did it the first year as researchers, because we would never ask you to do something we haven't tested ourselves. So we were the interventionists and the teachers did the in-class part. Then the next year, teachers did the intervention with kids and did the in-class part. And then last year, we got to do that randomized control trial. So we've been able to test this with a lot of teachers and kids, and we've gotten some incredible feedback, which we're really excited to share with you today. So just really high level, there's kind of three big parts to this intervention package. So the first thing is baseline. And all that's happening here is teachers are collecting data before the intervention starts. And Mark's going to talk us through the details of that in another moment. But it's just important to know it kind of starts there. Nothing else is changing. We're just taking some data to see how engaged are students and maybe how anxious are they feeling before we start the intervention. Then we're going to move into this instruction phase. And this is when we're delivering small group lessons, these triple R lessons. They're about 20-ish minutes per lesson, give or take. There could be up to 15. It's in this like 10 to 15 range, depending on your students and their needs. And you're teaching that in a small group. And Allison's going to talk us through the details of that a little bit later. Those are semi-scripted. Everything you would need is here for you. And we've built on those every year based on teacher and student feedback. So Allison will kind of point out some of the things we've done along the way. And then the last piece is this triple R in class. This is kind of like the really fun end where the kids get to practice these skills. They've learned, how does my body feel? What can I do? And then they're getting to actually practice in the moment, recognizing how they feel and using those strategies, which is really fun. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Mark, who's going to talk us through the first couple steps.
Okay, so we're going to be walking through a step-by-step process to implement Recognize, Relax, Record from start to finish. I'm going to walk through the first 3 steps, and I just want to emphasize the first 3 steps are all about preparation. Okay, so the intervention doesn't actually start until step 4, which Allison's going to cover in a little bit. And the preparation steps are super important because they're going to tell us a couple of really important and critical pieces of information that we just need to kind of work through before we get started. Okay, and the first step is all about figuring out which students you might choose to support using Recognize, Relax, Record. So you've heard a lot about the module tonight. Every material, handout, worksheet, data collection form, etc. that you see on the slides tonight is downloadable and editable within the module. So on one hand, if you're not able to get into the module right now, I want you to not stress. It's totally fine. Just listen and enjoy. And when you go to the breakout room, we can try to help you there. And if you're still struggling by the end of the night, just give us an email. We'll be happy to make sure that you can get in. That said, getting into the module is super helpful when you're ready to implement, because all of the information we're going to share tonight is written out in text form. So this is just kind of a preview. So if you're like, oh, what did he say you have to do for step 1? You can read about it in the module. Also, the handouts and things are downloadable and usable for you as well. So as we lean into figuring out in step 1, what students are we going to support? We're going to be using a couple of pieces of information to figure out which students in your class might be a good fit for this intervention. One of the main tools that we tend to use to connect students to the support is called behavior screening. Some of you may be super familiar with behavior screening. Some of you may be hearing about behavior screening for the first time tonight. If you're new to behavior screening, that's totally fine. Just know that it's a really quick check that can be completed for a whole class or even for a whole school to figure out which students might have elevated behavioral risk. There's a tool called the Student Risk Screening Scale for Internalizing and Externalizing, or SRSSIE. It's a really commonly used behavior screener that we really like because it tells you which students have risk for internalizing behaviors. Those are behaviors that are shy, anxious, withdrawn. Students with these behaviors tend to sometimes withdraw from social interaction. They might make complaints to the teacher about my stomach hurts, my head hurts, and that's real pain that these students are feeling. However, it's emerging from these anxious feelings that they're experiencing. And the tough truth about internalizing behaviors is that they tend to be less disruptive than acting out behaviors, but they absolutely have a cumulative impact on school performance. Kids that have internalizing challenges tend to perform less well on academic tasks, and the social stress that they're experiencing at school can interfere with the relationships that they build at school as well. Sometimes these kids are high flyers academically, like they're perfectionists. They need to be the best every time. They need to get every answer right. But that's really a stressful condition to have over a long run, because you're always worried about that next question or the next homework assignment. And so the idea here is to find out kids who have a risk for this kind of behavioral pattern so that we can connect them to this intervention early and teach them skills to cope with some of those anxious feelings. Now, if you don't have a behavior screener like the SRSSIE, you could use other school-wide data. Office discipline referrals are kind of so-so for kids with internalizing behaviors. Sometimes they co-occur with acting out behaviors, so it can work, but a lot of these kids may be more on the quiet side. So you might have to rely on things like kids that go to the nurse's office a lot, things that are causing them to miss instructions. So you might have to rely a little bit more on some other information if you don't have behavior screening data. If you do have behavior screening data, what you're going to be looking for is kids that have moderate or potentially even high risk for internalizing behaviors. This is a tier 2 intervention, which means it's not the most intensive thing that we can do, but at the same time, we've worked with quite a few students that have kind of moderate or high risk and found pretty good success for students with those behavioral patterns. Although I would say if you have kids with really significantly high internalizing needs, you might use this intervention, but it probably shouldn't be the only thing that you're doing. You might want to talk to other folks, mental health team members and others, to make sure that we're not relying on a tier 2 intervention when maybe something more intensive is needed. So you're kind of looking for that sweet spot of kids who definitely need a little bit of extra help, but we feel like maybe addressing this in the classroom is a good first step to see if we can make some progress here. We also generally coach you to look for students that have pretty good attendance. If kids are missing a lot of school, it's really hard to gain access to prevention efforts that we're providing in school. And sometimes just missing school can ratchet up some of the anxiety because we're missing a lot of instruction. We don't know what's going on in the classroom. So it's not that you wouldn't want to intervene for those kids, but the first order of business is let's find a way to help them get to school before we lean into providing other interventions. So again, the sweet spot here is kids with moderate to high risk for internalizing concerns, good attendance, and specifically kids in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, as that's who the intervention is meant for. Currently, we're working on a middle school extension. So if you're here for middle school and you're like, ooh, I want to try this, talk to us. We'd love to talk to you about a middle school extension potentially. What you're looking at right here is a picture of the SRSSIE. It's the behavioral screener I mentioned earlier. And if you do have access to that, again, you're looking for kids with moderate to high risk for internalizing concerns. Now, once we've found a couple of kids in the class that we want to nominate for a recognize, relax, record using those data sources that we talked about earlier, preferably we're talking about 2 to 3 students. 4 might be a little hard to manage. You'll see so there's some paperwork that we have to deal with, and so maybe 4 is a little bit too much. If you have only 1 student, this is a group intervention. We think it's most effective in a group, so it's kind of nice to make sure you have at least 2 kids who can do this together. But I think 3 is the sweet spot. Now, step 2, we're going to be focusing on connecting with other people at the school and in the child's life to make sure that this is a good fit for the child. So we're going to be talking a lot about social validity, which is a way of assessing, do people involved with the child and the child themselves, do they feel like this intervention is a good way to address the needs that they're showing at school? So the social validity forms that I'll be talking about are downloadable in the module. So the first thing that we're doing here is we're connecting with the students' parents or family members. This is critical because anytime we're doing something extra for a student, we want to connect with parents. We want to make sure that they're informed and then make sure that they're on board. We don't want to do something for a student at school that's going to maybe cross a cultural boundary with parents or make anyone feel like uncertain about what's happening with their child at school. Interventions are not something we do to children. They're something that we do for children in collaboration with parents, families, and other folks at school. So that first bullet there, connect with parents and families, is really, really important. As part of that process, it's super helpful to collect some additional data that kind of helps to provide a baseline set of information about a student's strengths and areas for growth. We're big fans of some rating scales that can be completed by teachers, parents, and students called the Social Skills Improvement System. It's not mandatory, but it's a really nice kind of broadband assessment of students' behavioral performance. If that's something you're interested in, we could definitely connect you to that. But you're looking for just some information about what the student's doing well and what we're hoping to make progress in for that student. And the last thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing some scheduling. So as the classroom teacher, if you're implementing this intervention, there are two main things that we need to plan for. The first is called the RRR rating period. This is going to be a time during the day when we're going to be collecting data throughout the full intervention, from baseline to RRR instruction to RRR in class. So we're going to pick a 40-minute block of instruction, and we're going to try to make that a time during the day when the student or students need a little bit of extra support to manage those internalizing behaviors. So we're kind of picking maybe the time of day that's the toughest for that student or students. A lot of times this ends up being like whole group reading or math instruction, a time where there's a lot going on in the classroom, there's high levels of task demands, because that's oftentimes the time that those internalizing behaviors show up. The next thing we're going to be doing is planning the RRR instruction block. This is not something that's happening right away. We're kind of planning into the future. This is a block of time when the teacher decides, hey, I have about 15, maybe 20 to 30 minutes I could spare a few times a week to do a small group lesson with the students who are participating. And if that sounds like a tall ask, just know that a lot of schools have set intervention blocks exactly for this purpose. So we're bringing a new intervention in to slot into existing intervention blocks, preferably in the classroom. But sometimes teachers can find creative ways to just steal 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there, whether that be during a rotation that's happening in the classroom or some little discretionary time that they might have. So far, we've worked with about, I think, 40 teachers, and they've all been able to find some time 3 to 4 times a week to do those lessons. So knowing when that's going to happen is super helpful for coming up later. And the last thing we're going to do is just prepare the forms. And the good news for you is there's not a lot to do here because the forms are already prepped for you. You're going to need a data collection sheet for the teacher. It's called the teacher recording form. It's downloadable and editable within the module. And you're going to want to prepare with the student self-monitoring sheet, which is going to be used later on. Allison's going to talk to you about that. And again, that's all set up for you, and we're going to dig into that a little bit later. So step 3 is where we start to collect some data, right? So we know that we can't just start an intervention immediately, because if you do, you have no way to know whether it's worked or not because you didn't kind of know where students started out, okay? So baseline data is absolutely critical, and we don't have to stay forever in baseline. You don't really want to be in baseline for too long because we're not doing anything extra or changing anything in the classroom, because this is sort of setting that level of where we're starting. So it's just going to be a quick about 2 weeks, maybe 6 to 8 data points that we're going to collect for baseline. Now, if you're a classroom teacher and you're here tonight, first of all, thank you for being here. We really appreciate your time. Not that we don't appreciate everyone else's time, but specifically, we really appreciate you being here. And I want to say, you've probably been told, if you've ever had a student in your class that had behavioral challenges, that before you start an intervention, you need some data. And that can be very frustrating for classroom teachers, particularly general education teachers, because collecting behavioral data oftentimes feels a little bit outside the scope of what you feel trained and comfortable in doing. And that can make it really difficult to monitor the effectiveness of behavioral interventions, because it's like, I can't sit there and do an observation of one student all the time because I'm teaching. I have a job to do, and that's supporting maybe 30 kids in my classroom. How would I collect data on one kid? Well, I have good news for you. There is a way to do it, and there's a way to do it without getting in the way of your instruction. And the way that we're going to do this is called direct behavior rating, or DBR. And I apologize to you tonight for giving you yet another acronym to remember, but I promise you, DBR just rolls right off the tongue, and as you get used to it, it's going to be your best friend, because one reason that this intervention is so great, RRR, is because some of the skills that you can learn as part of implementing this intervention can be useful to you in many other opportunities you have in your work with other interventions. So DBR is not specific to the Recognize, Relax, Record intervention. It is a validated progress monitoring method for collecting behavioral data that you could use for any student in your class that's experiencing a behavior intervention plan to monitor their progress over time. Okay, and we're going to tell you how to do DBR tonight. I'm going to give you kind of the Cliff Notes version, but I'm also going to connect you to some really helpful resources that you can call upon if you're interested in actually implementing this in your classroom. Okay, so what is a DBR, or direct behavior rating? A DBR is a brief rating of a specific target behavior or behaviors that is completed immediately following a specified observation period. Okay, so I mentioned earlier the triple R rating period. You're choosing a 40-minute block of time when students are struggling with internalizing difficulties. That is the observation period. And right at the end of that 40-minute period, you're going to circle two numbers on a form for each student that's going to approximate the frequency with which a behavior happened during that time. Okay, so I'm going to get into a little bit more detail in a second. However, before I go on, there is an entire training module that exists that's published by the University of Connecticut. And we have a whole nother Ci3T module on direct behavior rating that will connect you to the UConn training module. The picture on the left is the UConn module. I love this material because it has videos built into it that you can watch. It's going to explain the whole DBR process to you, and you can even practice rating videos of students in real classrooms to practice what this would look like and kind of calibrate to make sure that you're feeling comfortable with using this approach. And again, super helpful because it's not just even about the triple R intervention. It's useful for measuring many different behaviors and monitoring many different behavioral interventions. So I think it's a really good investment in your time, and your student improvement team or pre-referral intervention team or whomever you work with to work through like tiered interventions at your school or student support plans. They will be so impressed if you come to those plans knowing how to do this. You're gonna blow their minds, because this is an effective way for you to get baseline data and progress monitor behavioral interventions while you teach without adding a huge burden onto you. So it's very helpful. Okay, so moving on into the DBR. The DBR are going to be collected during that triple R rating period, that 40-minute block when students most need support for internalizing behaviors. You're collecting these data for about 6 to 8 days. That's probably going to cover about 2 weeks. And then you're going to keep collecting these data throughout the course of the full intervention. But no worries, because I promise you, it's really, really feasible and easy to do this. Now, I'm going to take just a minute. I'm going to take a risk here and see if I can zoom in just a little bit on the form. Okay, I think you're seeing my DBR form here zoomed in. Okay, what you're seeing here is 3 students represented as rows. And for each student, there are 2 behaviors. On the left side, you see academic engagement, and on the right side, you see internalizing behaviors. For each behavior, you're rating that behavior's frequency on a scale from 0 to 10. So for academic engagement, a 0 would be not at all. They weren't engaged at all. They were straight up asleep, or what have you. A 5 is about 50% of the time. They were on, they were off, they were on, they were off. And a 10 would mean they were laser focused, completely engaged the whole time. Now, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to be hitting the ends of those spectrums. A lot of those ratings are going to be somewhere in between, but this is going to give you a good approximation. So it's not an exact measurement. It's not an exact measurement, but it's a good approximation of about how often that behavior occurred. 10 is a good score. 0 would be a concern. Now, for internalizing behaviors, it's flipped the opposite direction. So the question is, how often did the student demonstrate internalizing behaviors? And if you're asking what are internalizing behaviors, hold that thought, because I'm going to hit that in just a second. If you have a 0 for internalizing behaviors, then we're saying you didn't show internalizing behaviors at all. That's a good thing. So you can see there's like even a little thumbs up on the 0 end of the scale to remind you 0 is good in this case. If they are demonstrating internalizing behaviors the whole time, crying, work avoidance, whatever that might look like, then you're at a 10, okay? But again, mostly it's going to be somewhere in between. So now that we've taken a little tour of the form, just think about this. Each day, at the end of your 40-minute block, if you have 3 students you're supporting, this will take the same amount of time that it will take to pick up this form. Think about it for just one quick second. You're making 6 circles on that form and putting it down, and that is your rating for the day. Okay, so very, very time efficient. You can do this super quickly. And best of all, you can do this after having taught for that 40-minute block, because we believe that teachers can do multiple things at the same time. We know that that's possible. So we're just adding one little mental task in there, which is I'm going to be kind of paying attention to those kids just a little extra so I can keep an eye on those levels of behavior. Okay, now you might be saying, I don't know, Mark. That seems a little too good to be true that you can do accurate behavioral assessment for those behaviors. Like, what even is academic engagement? Would I know it when I see it? Well, yeah, I think you probably would, but good point. We need to operationally define this behavior. So if you're a BCBA here, rest assured, we're working from well-defined behaviors, and the behavior definition is actually going to show up right at the bottom of this form. So academic engagement here is defined as actively or passively participating during classroom activities. Examples could include looking towards the teacher or a contributing peer, looking at instructional materials, and if we're looking away from the teacher, only doing so for brief seconds. And this definition is basically showing you we're not expecting perfection from students, right? We're not expecting little robots that are just staring at the teacher the whole time. We're expecting normal human behavior, which is, not going to be perfect, but within the parameters of what you expect from most students. Those examples fit that. Non-examples of engagement would include doing activities that are other than the assigned task, being disruptive, moving away from the designated area in the classroom where the student is supposed to be, or like doing something for more than 10 seconds that's super off task, like gazing out the window and staring off into space for over 10 seconds. That would count. Again, the expectation is not that you're laser focused in on this student the whole time, but you're just noticing throughout the lesson, what are my three friends up to, right? And just noticing that and cataloging that in the back of your mind, okay? Now, academic engagement, most people are pretty good to go on this because you do mostly know it when you see it, and it's pretty noticeable when it's not happening. Internalizing behaviors are a little bit trickier, I'll be honest. So we've got a definition of internalizing behaviors presented here, and then I'm going to show you a handout on the next slide that's going to go just a little bit deeper into what that looks like. Okay, so internalizing behaviors are observable indications that a person might be worried, scared, uneasy, or nervous. That it can include physical signs, avoidant behaviors, words or phrases, potentially words of worry, as I like to think about it, or other actions indicative of anxiousness. This could include physical signs like trembling, avoidant behaviors like avoiding eye contact or staring off into space, words or phrases that express performance concerns. I can't do it, this is too hard, negative self-talk, excessive seeking of assurances or feedback. Do you ever have students that are following you around the classroom, wanting you to look at every single mark that they make on their paper? That would be indicative of an internalizing concern. Some non-examples could include physical signs that show relaxation or attentiveness, avoidant behaviors or the absence of avoidant behaviors like being academically engaged, or other observable actions that are contextually appropriate emotional responses. So you might see something that's like a student who's like struggling a little bit, but managing those emotions and just kind of moving forward with their work. That would not necessarily be an internalizing behavior. Now, if you're looking for more examples, we have this whole worksheet that's in the module that you can access that basically kind of breaks down physical signs, avoidant behaviors, words of worry, and other observable actions with examples and non-examples of each. So if you're kind of thinking about a specific student and you're thinking, how would I monitor their internalizing behaviors? This little worksheet is a great way for you to hone in on some of the specific behavioral patterns that you might see for some of your students. Okay, now just to wrap up, the DBR procedures are going to be, again, happening during that 40-minute block of instruction, 3 to 4 times a week. Most people choose 4 times a week. It's really important to remember you're not doing this all day, right? This is not a check-in, check-out form that you have to fill out in 40-minute intervals through the whole school day. Nope, none of that. One 40-minute period, once during each school day, probably about 4 times a week. And you're trying to complete that rating form as soon after that period ends as possible. Sometimes people are tempted to wait until the end of the day because I know you're so busy, and a lot of times you're facing transitions from one subject to another that can make this tricky to do. But the longer you wait from the period when you observed, the harder it is to remember and approximate those behaviors because we got a lot on our minds, right? So it's nice if you can find procedures and ways to make you help you to fill that out as soon as possible. Now, last piece here before we go into a breakout room and kind of talk about what you've heard so far. The idea of a progress monitoring form is that you collect the data and then you put them someplace so that you can use them, right? If you collect data and then put it into a binder, never to be seen again, it's not really doing you a whole lot of good. We have some digital forms that you can use to digitally graph those DBR. Some people love those. You can find them in the module. However, honestly, and I'm a digital guy myself, I've heard from a lot of people that they really prefer just a printed handout that they can simply pick up a pencil, mark it on the sheet, so they're circling, and at the end of the day, they're graphing their DBR forms. And you're only going to graph the engagement data. Allison's going to talk about that a little bit later. And it's really important to put this in a graph because this is how we're going to decide whether the intervention's working over time. And eventually, students are going to be graphing their own data, and you're going to even be able to compare the teacher's ratings versus the student's ratings. So that's an important piece to remember. Okay, so we've talked about the first 3 steps. Thank you for bearing with me through that part. Allison's going to get to talk to you about the exciting part after this break. Right now, though, we want you to go to a breakout room that you're going to be sent to in just a minute. And what we would like you to do is just think through your initial thoughts and reactions to what you've heard so far about Recognize, Relax, Record, with a specific emphasis on thinking about your students who have internalizing concerns, what that looks like in your class, and maybe potentially some of the times during the day when you could see maybe that's when I would pick the triple R rating period because that's when those students are having difficulty with these behaviors. Okay. Some of my colleagues are going to put those prompts into the chat, or you'll be able to see them in your breakout room. So you don't have to memorize all that, I promise. We're going to talk about that for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back and hear from Allison about the actual intervention component. So we'll see you in 10.
I hope you enjoyed hearing from Mark and Elise and Kathleen about getting set up, and then enjoy the time with others in the breakout room. So Mark talked about connecting students to the intervention and then what we would do before anything begins. And now I'm going to walk you through step 4, which is to start providing that triple R instruction in that small group format. So as a helpful reminder, we'll go through all of the materials you would use throughout the entirety of the intervention, from start to finish, all the way through these 7 steps, and they are all free and publicly available in the module. So if you're like, oh my gosh, she was going through how do I get to these lesson plans? Number 1, this is recorded, so it'll always be available for you to go back and watch, but also all of the materials are located in our module. So if you just click on the triple R card on our module page after you've logged in, you can access everything, not only this module, but all of our suite of materials that we have as well. So all of them are freely available. And if you ever get lost, please contact us and we'll be happy to help you find the material to be able to implement it. So we are on step 4. What Mark emphasized was that DBR, when we're collecting that baseline data, it doesn't happen just during baseline and then it ends, right? If you look at this line right here on this infographic, it goes all the way through, which is a key component to be able to look at, is this student making progress throughout the intervention? And Rebecca is going to share next about how the student and you can benefit from doing that as well. What's important to know is that while this DBR, this part of the intervention starts, the second part, the instruction part begins, which is where you begin to teach students a 3-component lesson sequence. So we have developed, we being a huge team of researchers who were former classroom teachers, school psychologists. We've consulted with experts in the field to be able to develop these up to 15 lessons that you could teach, and they're semi-scripted because we wanted to really give teachers the autonomy to be able to customize this intervention to the needs of the particular students that you're working with. But we wanted to make sure that while we are giving everyone the autonomy, that you are still sticking with what is research and what is planned, and making sure it's still appropriate for those students in grades 3 through 5. So as you notice, we have up to 15 lessons, and I'll talk about what that means here when we break into the little bit deeper across each of these three major components. We've semi-scripted them out, like I said, and we've estimated over the last 3 years, we've gotten to go into the classrooms and really work with teachers and students and families to see, like, what does this mean for it to be feasible? We've really taken time to listen and learn from them and integrate this feedback to where we've gotten today. And so we've planned for, and they've let us know that about 20 to 30 minutes is appropriate for each of these lessons to be taught. And something that's really great and unique about this intervention that we've talked about is that it's teacher led. So the teacher is finding a time point throughout the day to teach these lessons. And what's really great about that is that they're then getting to experience what these students are sharing about these personal feelings, about their anxious thoughts, and what makes them anxious throughout the school day. And so teachers are part of that conversation, and the students and the teachers really loved building that small group connection with the teacher and then among their peer groups. So, in addition to building out all of the teacher materials, we also have family materials, which are developed in English and in Spanish. And so we recommend sending home the strategy step cards so that the families are also learning along with what the students are learning to be able to not only use this intervention in school, but to really generalize it outside of just the academic setting as well, so that they can support them at home. Because I don't know about you, but I mean, school is a very anxious place for me, but it doesn't just stop outside of the building. I tend to be anxious in all areas of my life. And so these strategies are developed as well as these family supports to be able to support that student along their journey. So those are available in English and Spanish, like I said. And then all of the teacher materials are digitally available, which has been really great and easy for the teachers to access. And we have a fun little video. I'm going to show you how to access those. We spent a lot of time and attention really listening, like I talked about earlier, to what the students found to be most engaging about these materials. Starting off from the beginning, when we first developed these supports, we developed these characters and we anchor them to the text to be able to provide a visual support, and they repeat throughout the lessons, and that's purposeful so you can see the characters develop along the way and be able to use the intervention. The students really resonated with that. We also have icons to associate each of the strategies that they'll learn, along with games that are embedded. And again, all of the materials are digitally available. We've put them on a Google platform because we know a lot of school districts work in Google Schools, so they can easily access the materials to be able to have the students interact, as well as to prepare to teach the lessons and the lesson plans and all of the forms that go along with it to make sure that you're implementing them, all of the steps that we've outlined. So I'm going to take a second and we're going to watch a video walking you through how to get to those lesson plans and access those materials in what we call the instructional hub.
Throughout the lesson plans, there will be directions to display visual cue cards, strategy cards, and story cards. These directions are located inside of the gray boxes. Small images of the cards you will need are also included. The cards that you will use can be printed and cut out or displayed virtually. There is a menu on the left-hand side of the hub from which you can select whichever lesson you are teaching that day. Once you have selected your lesson, you can click on the link to download or print the cards. Or if you prefer, you can click on the link to access the digital version on Google Slides. To use the Google Slide Deck, first click Slideshow. Once you are in slideshow mode, you can click to navigate. From the Table of Contents slide, click on the name of the lesson you are teaching that day. The first slide will display all the materials you need to teach the lesson. All of the following slides display the digital cards. At the end of the lesson, there will be a slide where you can click the Table of Contents to return to that slide instead of clicking on to the next lesson. If you choose to use the digital cards, you can do so by turning a laptop or monitor around towards your students to display the cards as you click through them.
Okay, perfect. So that is how you access the instructional hub, and we'll have an opportunity to dive deeper into the module and these materials in a bit. But jumping back into the lessons, each of the lessons within the kit has the same sequencing or predictable structure. So it starts out with a big idea, and then we have the suggested pacing and prompts, as well as pictures of the embedded materials, the situational stories, activities for the students to engage in, and then that's semi-structured nature, like I talked about. The pacing guide right here is that little small picture next to my small group table, gives a suggestion on how much time we think you should spend on each of the components. So if you look really closely, each of the lesson plan starts with an open, and then it has tell, show, do, practice, and monitor, and then generalize and close. And if you look here, the open one, we only suggest about 2 minutes. So if you start teaching these lessons and you do some self-reflection after, and you're like, wow, that took a little bit more time than I had originally allotted for, you're looking at your treatment integrity form. What are some of the things that I could kind of tweak before I go to teach the next lesson? And you think, oh, I actually spent like 10 minutes on that opening. I'm going to go back because they suggested that I only allot 2 minutes for this. And so it's meant to just be like a quick touch point and then move on to the next section. So while we made these semi-scripted, these are kind of the key pieces that you would want to hone in on, especially as you begin to prepare to teach the lessons. And then the teachers let us know over time, it became really easy to prepare to teach these lessons. And we have everything that you would need right at your fingertips to be able to immediately do it. So, like I talked about, there are 3 components to each of these lessons. So we start out with the recognize, and all of the lessons, the up to 15, are sequential. So you would start out with lesson 1 and then go all the way to 15. And I'll talk about when I say up to 15 whenever I get to the relax component. But we start off with students learning what it means to feel anxious, learning that vocabulary, talking about what it shows up like in their body, because especially with students that are with and at risk of internalizing behaviors, that looks different from person to person, and often they're occurring inside. And so teachers and students really shared that it was helpful for the students to be able to verbalize what they are feeling, and to be able to share that with the teacher. And that became really impactful as we go along with that self-monitoring portion towards the end and the in-class part, for them to be able to show, like, I'm making progress towards reducing the amount of time I'm feeling anxious during academic instruction. So there are 3 lessons that they start out with and recognize. Then we move into the relax portion. And so this is where you have some choice on if you want to spend 1 day teaching the strategy, or you can spend up to 2 days. Some of these strategies, like the breathing strategy, is pretty familiar to teachers and students. And so you might choose to just spend 1 day teaching that instead of the day where they learn it, day 1 mostly. And then on the second day is more of a practice opportunity to be able to learn more deeply about what that looks like, and then opportunities to practice that within that small group. So you might choose to do just 1 day of breathing strategies, but then positive self-talk, that might be a new strategy for students, and you can choose, oh, I think I want to spend the 2 full days on that, and you have the opportunity to be able to do that. For each of the strategies, the students learn to define what the strategy is. They learn how to use it and recognize different situations for when they do use it. And then, like I talked about, there's that demonstration part. And then the day 2 often has more of a practice opportunity to practice that before they move into the in-class portion. There are a number of interactive activities for the students. We have worksheets, there's drawing activities. The students really loved engaging with this and really had some profound things that they were sharing with the other students and teachers. But what's important to remember is that sometimes students really love to get deep into these activities. And so teachers let us know that setting a timer and letting the students know how long they had to complete the activity to be able to stay within that pacing was really beneficial. So after the students have already learned what it means to be anxious and to be academically engaged, and then what they can do, those 4 relax strategies, then we move into the record portion of the lesson plans, which is where students learn how to self-monitor these behaviors. So first, that we start out with academic engagement, something that's a little bit more familiar to them in class room settings, and then in the second lesson they're taught how to self-monitor their anxious thoughts and feelings. And so, like Mark shared at the beginning of the DBR, you're still doing these observations. And so now students, Rebecca's going to share in the next portion, are then going to learn how to join you in that time to self-monitor those 2 behaviors as well. But we wanted to prepare these students before they got to that to be able to do the self-monitoring. And so they're learning about all of these self-monitoring procedures. They have their own form. There's an audio cue ding. We call it the RRR ding video to help them during that in-class portion every 10 minutes to have a time as a point of reflection on that interval, as well as a graphing handout to be able to provide a visual analysis of all the progress that they've made throughout this intervention. After students have had some opportunities to practice those in-class parts, they come back for a final lesson with the teacher in the small group, and it's called RRR Ready Go. They get to troubleshoot what they're doing really well, provide opportunities for the teacher to give immediate corrective feedback, and an opportunity to say, hey, like, we had talked about academic engagement looking like this, and I rated you this, but I noticed that you're rating this. Let's talk about what that means and come to a common ground moving forward. There's also optional review lessons built in. We know that things happen throughout the school year, holiday breaks, weather events, and so we have these still semi-scripted optional review lessons built in for each one of those lessons. Or we have a shell that you can use if you're like, you know what, they actually just need this one key part of the lesson to be able to move forward and really get that, and so I'm going to use that part as well. And then next, we have another video example of how you might open and close a lesson.
To open a lesson, first review school-wide expectations with your student and ask them which one they would like to focus on during this lesson. Then give some examples of how they can follow the expectation that they chose. Next, remind students to pay attention to how they feel throughout the lesson, as they will be completing their feelings recording card ratings at the end.
Okay, now that we've gone over our school-wide expectations, responsibility, respect, and honesty, which one do you want to work on today?
Respect.
Okay, so we're going to listen to each other when we talk to each other in our lesson today. And then keep track of your anxious feelings and how you're feeling throughout the lesson. And then at the end, we will record them on this recording feelings card.
At the end of the lesson, you will close by helping students to practice rating their own anxious feelings. First, provide students with their feelings recording cards and expo markers. These can be found inside of the clear zipper pouch within your RRR binder. Then, model accurately rating anxious feelings. Provide specific feedback to students for accurately rating their feelings, such as, "That makes sense, you circled a 0 because you are not feeling anxious at all." Or, if you notice that a student is struggling to accurately rate their feelings, provide corrective feedback, such as, "Let's think about that rating. If a 10 means you are feeling very anxious, and right now you are not feeling anxious at all, what might be a more accurate number to circle?" After students complete their ratings, refer back to the school-wide expectation that they chose at the beginning of the lesson and provide them with feedback and reinforcement.
Okay, click one more time. Okay, so now that you've gotten to learn about what students would benefit from this intervention and looked at the lesson plans, we're going to give you an opportunity to choose what you would like to do next in our next breakout room. So one of the breakout rooms You can choose to spend some time on your own diving through that module to explore all of the materials that we have. We have one dedicated just to exploring the instructional hub. There's a third room about implementation planning. So looking at talking through what time of day would I do the DBR versus what time of day would be recommended for me to teach those lessons. And then we have another room where you can work with a trainer or a coach.
We hope you had some productive conversations in your breakout rooms. Before we get started with the remaining few steps, I want to take a moment to just orient us to where we are in this R process. So at this point, we've completed talking about kind of that first phase, which is all about choosing your students and collecting baseline data. That's what Mark walked us through. And then you were just talking about, in some capacity, that second phase, which is where you are working directly with students in that R instruction phase to work through those lessons. So that's what Ali B walked us through. So you're meeting with students in those small groups and teaching the lessons. So now we're moving into kind of that last phase where students are starting to use those skills during the academic period that you've identified where you have been collecting DBR data. So you, during this process, you keep collecting that DBR data. And now students are going to start this self-monitoring procedure during that same time period. So that is step 5. So we're implement RRR in class and monitor student performance. And the purpose of this phase is to help students take what they've learned during that RRR instruction and apply it during their school day. So in this phase, teacher responsibilities mostly involve providing students with all of the things that they need to successfully engage in that self-monitoring during the academic period. So all of the materials that you'll need for that can be found in the modules, and you can find some additional resources and details about what this step entails in there as well. And you can specifically look for that step 5 on the side panel. And in step 5, students start that self-monitoring. So for their academic engagement, their levels of anxious feelings, and then their use of the relaxation strategies. And over the next few slides, we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. But up until now, teachers have been the ones graphing their DBR engagement data. And when students start their recording in class, they start adding their ratings of engagement to that document as well. So it becomes really easy to see progress and to compare your ratings with those of the students. And we'll talk a little bit more about graphing towards the end of this step. But we have some resources that outline the different components that you'll be implementing if you're the teacher implementing this intervention. And then just like in the previous step that Ali B talked about, there's a treatment integrity form. So there's also one in this module, the RRR in class, in this step rather. So this form, this treatment integrity form, provides step-by-step reminders of all of the components of self-monitoring. So that's from handing out the self-monitoring sheets to starting the RRR ding video, which we'll talk about in just a moment, which students need to complete their self-monitoring ratings. So for this form, you rate all of the procedures on a scale from 0, which is not implemented, to 3, which is fully implemented. And you can do that for each specific student because it is possible that steps get implemented for some, but maybe not all students, because we know sometimes life just happens in a classroom. So this allows you to just record that variability so you have an accurate picture of what took place. And then if possible, similar to the step that Mark was talking about, we really recommend completing this form directly following the RRR rating period because it makes it a lot easier to recall the details for each session. Okay, so we are going to watch this short video, which shows you how to access that ding video that I mentioned earlier. And then it goes over a few of the logistics that you'll use as the teacher when you're implementing this with students.
During in-class, students will complete their self-monitoring sheets. To begin the in-class period, navigate to the ebook overview page and scroll down to the video RR Ding resource. Then click on the link to YouTube. This video is 40 minutes long, and the ding will sound every 10 minutes. Every time that the students hear the ding, they will fill out their self-monitoring forms by circling how they are feeling and how engaged they are, and putting a check mark underneath any strategies that they used if they were feeling anxious. Briefly check in with your students as they complete their forms. This feedback can be something quick and discreet, such as a thumbs up, or using your school's reinforcement system, such as by handing out a ticket. Other feedback may include providing students with a prompt or reminder to begin filling out their self-monitoring forms. Or, if a student seems to be struggling to complete their form, you may provide them with feedback and suggest a strategy for them to use. At the end of the in-class period, the last ding will chime 3 times to indicate that the period has ended.
Okay, so just a few notes I want to make on those check-ins that the lovely Catherine talked about as she was narrating that video that you'll be doing with students throughout the period. They don't need to be lengthy conversations, right? And you can think about prioritizing which students you check in with based on your observations of their behavior. So if students are demonstrating the expected behavior, it might just be providing some brief behavior-specific praise, maybe even just a signal like a thumbs up. And then you can spend a little bit more time on the check-ins with students who might be struggling a little bit or need a little bit more direction. And then as students get more comfortable using the form, they typically need less help, and your check-ins might become less frequent or more reliant on kind of that nonverbal communication. So this is the student self-monitoring sheet that students will use to self-monitor during that RRR rating period. Now, this is the same time of day, again, that you have been collecting and you still are collecting that DBR data. So you have the opportunity to see if this self-monitoring procedure is associated with an increase in those goal behaviors and a reduction in the challenging behaviors. So each time the ding from that video goes off, students record how engaged they were during that time period, how they were feeling in terms of their anxious feelings, and then any strategies that were used within that period. That happens all the way down. So 4 times that ding will go off, students record, and then on the 4th and final ding, which had those 3 chimes, they'll also rate their overall engagement down at the bottom of the sheet. The other thing we want to think about in this step is reinforcement. And reinforcement is really anything that we do that results in an increase of a specific behavior. So you have some really kind of powerful tools that you can use to reinforce expected student behavior. And those are things like your attention, right? Are you making eye contact? Are you close in proximity to students? Maybe making some of those nonverbal gestures. And it's things like your words. So on this table, you'll see some behaviors that you'll likely encounter if this is something that you're implementing, right? So correctly completing the student self-monitoring form, demonstrating academic engagement, accurately rating engagement, even when it might not be rated highly, right? That's something that's really important and cool. And then also using the relaxation strategies. So as you're noticing those things, we really encourage you to think about using behavior-specific praise with students so that we see those behaviors, or you see those behaviors more frequently, right? So saying things like, Omar, it looks like You took great notes during the lesson today and did all the practice problems. Nice job setting yourself up for success, right? If Omar is demonstrating academic engagement for the whole portion. And then, in addition to that behavior-specific praise, there are going to be times where you need to provide students with some specific feedback. So these are some common, maybe challenges that you might incur or encounter is probably a better word, especially as you are just getting started. So we wanted to share some of that language that teachers have used in those situations. So for example, if you notice a student has skipped an interval, you might say something like, that was the third ding, fill out your ratings in this row, and then gesture to this sheet. There might be some feedback that you need to give if your ratings are quite different than the ratings of the student. So that might be something like, I see you rated yourself a 9 for engagement. I noticed you playing inside your desk and drawing in your math book. So my rating for you would be a 5 or a 6. Can you tell me about your ratings? Right? So not directly telling the student to change that, but kind of acknowledging that there might be some discrepancies there, and you might have seen a few things that maybe lended themselves to not being engaged the entire time. And then again, really utilizing that nonverbal feedback. Okay, so now we are going to do an activity where we're going to look at some student self-monitoring sheets and consider where we might provide some feedback for students. So there'll be examples of completed student sheets. And what we're going to do is just give you a moment to look at the form. It'll be up on the slide. And then I'm going to pose a question that'll also pop up on the slide. And you'll provide an answer in the chat. So it's just an A, B, or C question. You can just type your response in there. We'll give people a moment to answer, and then we'll chat a little bit about what that feedback might be as a whole group. Sound good? Okay. I'm assuming everyone said yes. So this is our first form. I am not cool enough to zoom in my screen, but I think I can use a laser pointer. So our teacher is Mr. R. Our student is James, and we're looking at a form from reading. So I want you to think about this in kind of 3 buckets. There's our interval ratings, which is this kind of orange bucket, right, where students are rating it for each time that ding video goes off. There's the overall ratings down at the bottom that they complete at the end. And then there's these strategies that they used within those specific interval ratings. So those are the 3 pieces that I want you to just take a moment to look at for this student, and then I'll pose that question. Okay, so as you're thinking about this, what do you notice? Where might you provide your feedback? Is it A, the student is not using strategies, B, a missed scoring interval, or C, using too many strategies? What do you think? Open up that chat and give me a letter. Nice, I see a lot of B's coming through. So yeah, on this one, I also noticed that it looks like the student missed those 2 scoring intervals. So the feedback that you give the student might sound something like this. Oh, it looks like we missed a few. Remember, every time you hear that ding, you'll complete a row on the form. Is there anything that might be making this tricky to complete? Does that make sense? We're checking in, we're letting them know what the expectation is, and then seeing if there's any additional support we might be able to offer. Awesome. Okay, this is our next sheet. Again, we're looking at those 3 buckets. Our teacher is Mrs. T, our student is Riley, and the subject is science. So take just a moment to look at this form, and then I'll pose the question. All right, so what are you noticing? Where might you direct your feedback? A, overall score is inconsistent with the ratings. B, the student is not using their strategies. Or C, they're rating that they're highly anxious and engaged. Okay, nice. Yeah, so I also noticed that it looks like those overall ratings are not really consistent with their specific interval ratings. So if you were implementing this and you notice that, the feedback that you give to the student might sound something like, great job remembering to fill out the form for every interval. I noticed that you rated anxious feelings as mostly ones, but then a 6 for your overall score. Remember, your overall score represents how you did throughout the whole math lesson. So if your interval ratings are 1s and 2s, your overall score would also be a 1 or a 2, right? Kind of clarifying what the expectations are for that student for those ratings. All right, we have one more. We're looking at Mrs. S for our teacher, Sophie is our student, and the subject is math. Take a moment to look at this DBR form. All right, and then where might you direct your feedback? Is it A, overall scores are too high, B, anxious, but they're not, or they're rating themselves as anxious, but they're not using their strategies, or C, missed scoring intervals? Nice. Okay, I see a lot of those coming in. So same thing, right? Sophie's reporting that she's feeling anxious, but then isn't using any of those relaxation strategies. So the feedback might sound something like, it looks like you were feeling a bit anxious today. Remember, you can use your strategies. If you're feeling anxious during math tomorrow, what strategy do you want to try? Right? Simple, reminding them they've learned these. Which ones might they want to put in place? Thanks for playing along, everyone. Okay, so then we are going to start looking at that engagement data. So your ratings for DBR and then the students from the self-monitoring sheet. And that engagement data is what we graph. So you have been graphing, or teachers have been graphing that DBR, their DBR score for engagement. And now students are going to start adding their engagement scores as well to that form. So they can do this bar graph style and color in the lines up to the scores. So that's this guy over here. The teacher is that blue line, and then where the bar graphs start, that's the student. You can also use the same structure that teachers have been using with a dot connecting it through the lines, but you just use a different color to indicate the difference between your ratings as the teacher and then the students as the DBR. And so this is great because you can really see the progress that students are making, and it's a really quick way to think about your ratings and the students' ratings. So they'll add theirs for the day, and then you can come through and add yours as well. And then just a reminder for the graphing, it's the overall engagement score that gets added to the graph. And then again, once you check in with the student, you'll add your dot to the graph just like you have been doing. And that is step 5. So we're gonna move on to step 6, which is to monitor maintenance and generalization. This step involves reviewing data and helping the students use these newly learned skills in new settings, right? So ideally, you're entering and graphing the data that you collected in step 5, and you're using that to determine how long to implement. So hopefully, as you're implementing in step 5, you're seeing positive impacts on student behavior. And if this is the case, you'll continue to implement and monitor that step 5 component, RRR in class, for at least 4 weeks. And then we would kind of set our sights on this maintenance and generalization phase. The module has information and details, resources that you can find for this step in step 6. But typically what happens in this step is you're helping students maintain positive gains without needing to rely really on that full intervention. So maybe you might drop down to using self-monitoring less often. Maybe it's just 1 or 2 times per week, or it might be relying on verbal reminders and check-ins more. And then for generalization, we're looking for those newly learned skills to pop up in new contexts. So, are these skills being used in other areas of the school? And this is a great opportunity to continue collaboration with students' family members, to encourage those students use the relaxation strategies at home and in the community, and to make sure that they have access to those family resources that Allie B shared a little bit about earlier. And then that leads us to step 7, which is to seek input from families, students, and teachers. So as you monitor student progress in steps 5 and 6, you also want to gather additional information about how all those parties are feeling about the intervention. All right, and then you have guessed it, the materials that you'll need for this can be found in the module listed under step 7. So here we have the forms that can be filled out by students, families, and teachers. And this gives you really valuable information about how it's going and maybe even some modifications you want to make. And I will say, we've talked a little bit about some studies that we've done, but these forms aren't tied to research, right? These forms are tied to the intervention itself, because you want to know how people are doing. And you can also kind of compare where they started with the pre-forms versus where they're ending to see, did they think they were going to hate it and they loved it? Did they think they were going to love it and they really loved it? But it gives you some interesting perspectives to really see how it worked or what you might be able to tweak for students. And then we just wanted to share some of that information that we've collected from teachers who have used this intervention. These are some of the direct quotes from some social validity interviews that we did with teachers. So one reported, literally saw a shift in body language after lessons. That's kind of cool to see. And then the one, or one of the ones that I really want to point out from this list is this guy. At first I thought it was going to be a lot of work, but it worked seamlessly into our routine. I think that's really important because we did go through a lot of steps, right? And we looked at a lot of things, and that can seem like a lot, but when you break it down, it is something that can fit pretty seamlessly into the work that you're doing. So something important to keep in mind. And then a couple more that I'll just focus on is this guy right here in this list. So in this school, we have a lot of trauma and students struggling. I think kids with anxiety are often overlooked and they have a need, and now we have something to do for them for the first time. So really cool and inspiring to see, and you have access to these. And then you might be thinking, well, that's great that the teachers liked it. What do students think? Good news, we have some information on that too. So this is some of the feedback that we received from students who were participating in this intervention. And I will just point out a couple of these. It definitely made me improve on a bunch of stuff, helped me with my self-control. That's pretty cool. And then the last one that I'll just point out is this guy at the bottom. My brother makes me feel mad. I take deep breaths and visualize being somewhere calm. As the youngest of 4, I can definitely relate to that, though my siblings might tell you that I am the one making them mad. But I think that's a really cool example of how these strategies were used outside of the classroom where they were originally intended. So thinking about that generalization. So as we get ready to close out, we just want to take a moment, invite everybody to take a deep breath, and then let's reflect and think for a little bit in the chat. So I'm going to invite you to think about your answer to one of these 2 questions. So what are some potential benefits of implementing RRR in your setting? Or what are some benefits of having the general education teacher be the person teaching the RRR lessons in the classroom? So think about everything that you've taken in tonight. We'll take just a moment to reflect on those.
One of the big points of feedback we received from teachers is that they felt like they were gathering a lot of information through the years on how to respond to kids with challenging behaviors that were like acting out and non-compliance. But they said the thing that they needed the most, and that was confirmed from some earlier work that we did on this project, was that they really needed stuff that classroom teachers could do to support kids with internalizing issues. And teachers told us too that they themselves felt better. Like they felt like they were using the strategies, and they were periodically pre-correcting and reminding kids to use them during the class time. It was one of the most positive experiences I've had, and I've been doing this for 30 years. And I give total props to the teachers, because the early stages of this were teachers testing it, giving us really honest and opening feedback on it. And in the next year, we'll be continuing to analyze the data, seeing what worked, listing these very specific things like what Rebecca shared with you, and we'll be making yet another version of this. So as we wrap up tonight, thanks to all the presenters and to all the coaches that were here today, and to Stacy for being so very calm and moving people through this experience. And if you're thinking about where to go from today, we have one additional session that's going to be offered on functional assessment-based interventions, and that's working at the very top of the triangle. Great, effective intervention. It's very, very close to being established as an evidence-based practice. And for those of you that are here tonight from Kansas communities, if you are somebody that wants to double or triple your professional learning points, remember you have that option through the state of Kansas, where you can do knowledge, application, and impact. And we'd be happy to send you the forms that are already in place for you to move that forward. So one thing that you might choose to do tonight as you wrap up is write down a couple action items for yourself so that you can take what you've learned. And we particularly want to thank the person who put in the chat, I came just to get the points. I'm actually finding that I'm learning something that I enjoyed. And I'm glad to hear that. And I'm glad also for people that are really coming because they've got that big commitment to figuring out how to support kids with internalizing issues. So 2 things you might put on your calendar. If you do want to join us for our last session on April 28th, it will be a Tuesday. And you are more than welcome to come join us for that particular opportunity. And then we also have a couple coaching calls. So I know we had some great comments in the chat about, I'm a parent. I would like to know a little bit about how I can work with my student and know what to ask at their schools. We'd love to support that. And you guys are going to be the first to hear about this. And David, thank you for getting this posted. We opened up today all the topics and dates and times for next year for this series. And so if you would like to see what's coming next, you can click here to register. But again, all the topics, brief descriptions, and dates and times, and that information is all there for you. So we will be capping next year the enrollment. So if you're interested, I encourage you to sign up shortly. But thank you very much for the gift of your time and your attention and your engagement. Well done on the chat, everybody. And I hope you have a beautiful end of the day. Take care.